Good afternoon. My name is Kathleen Moore. Can you hear me? Can somebody throw in the chat that, oh, I see that Rick can hear me. Great. My name is Kathleen Moore. I am a management analyst at the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation at the Administration for Children and Families. And I'm going to be moderating this session today about the TANF Data Collaborative. We've got three great speakers today. First up will be Richard Hendra, who is the director of the Center for Data Insights at MDRC. And then we'll have two speakers from the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice at the Actionable Intelligence for Social Policy Initiative. And that is Dennis Culhane and Sharon Zanti. So the TANF Data Collaborative is part of a broader effort called the TANF Data Innovation Project. And this was an effort that started late in 2016 with the goal of supporting innovation and improved effectiveness of TANF programs by enhancing the use of data from TANF and related human service programs. This effort has been broad and has encompassed a lot of different activities, and one of the main ones is the TANF Data Collaborative, which Richard will explain in more detail in his talk. I think across any of the TDI activities is a common theme is the use of data for understanding the broader impact TANF has on families and improve the knowledge of how federal government and grantee partners can use data to more effectively and efficiently serve TANF clients. So we have a chat function in the conferencing app, and feel free to put questions in there at certain points. Some speakers may ask for engagement through the chat. Please feel free to do that. And is there anything else, speakers, that you would like folks to know? Okay, I think with that, Richard, would you like to start?
Yes, can you hear me okay? Okay, great, thank you. Thanks for coming today. So we're going to be talking about a part of the TANF Data Collaborative, which focuses on integrating, linking TANF and UI data. But I'm going to give you a broader overview of some of the other activities we're doing, and especially activities that relate to this topic. So the TANF Data Collaborative is managed by 4 contractors. So MDRC is the lead organization. We're involved in pretty much all the different activities. Chapin Hall at the University of Chicago led our needs assessment. And also is heavily involved in our pilot initiative. Actionable Intelligence for Social Policy leads a lot of our technical assistance having to do with data linkage, data acquisition, also diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the Coleridge Initiative, led by Julia Lane, led our applied data analytics training, which was really the foundational data analytics training for the initiative. Project sponsored by the Office of Policy Research and Evaluation at ACF, and also the Office of Family Assistance. Our project officers are Gurley Wright and Nicole Dettering. So this very much is a collaborative, and I think the true sense of the word, where the states, universities, contractors, the federal government, we're all working together and all learning from each other about how to support efforts to make better use of TANF data. We emphasize in this slide the routine use of data. So we're trying to not promote one boutique analytics project. We're trying to spur ongoing usage of data in TANF to make informed decisions about policy and practice. And we know if these projects focus on informing policy and practice, they're much more likely to be sustained. Of course, the centering goal of our initiative is about doing these things in support of improving the employment and well-being of the participants in the TANF system. So as much as we could get excited about the methods or approaches or technology, this is all about using data to help participants. So that's the centering goal. So in all of our technical assistance, we use this framework. And this framework follows the typical trajectory of a data analytics project. So we start off with laying the groundwork. So laying the groundwork consists of activities like making sure that research questions are operationalizable, their data answerable, their research questions are feasible, making sure that projects are adequately staffed, making sure that the right methods are used, creating a work plan. So all that really important groundwork that sometimes we skip over in analytics projects is something that we pay a lot of attention to in this project. We then go on to accessing data, which is a lot of what today is about, because we know data access is a serious issue in the human services. So how do we overcome barriers to data sharing? How do we extract data from systems? And then how do we use that data in analysis? Data preparation is another big focus. Once we have the data, it's not always clear how to set up data that might be prepared for reporting purposes. How do you set that up for analysis? So we get into a lot of topics like cleaning data, creating measures, and setting up the right sort of unit of analysis so that data that's used for reporting can be used in analysis. And then deep into this process, we get to what really I think is the easy part and maybe the fun part, which is data analysis. So in this project, we focus a lot on topics like caseload analysis, descriptive analyses, certainly, some predictive analysis, segmentation, understanding your caseload, understanding their outcomes. And then we get the communication of data and findings, because if we don't do that well, then no one understands what we did and it doesn't have any impact. So that's a really critical feature as well. And we display this as a wheel to convey that this is an ongoing process. So one project leads to another, so we could evolve evidence about what works and how to better serve our customers. So the work you're going to hear about today, and you're going to hear a lot more about this from Dennis and Sharon, fits squarely in those buckets of preparing data and accessing data. So we're going to talk a lot about a toolkit that we're really excited about, because we've heard across the country the frustration in not being able to understand the end of the story. So as TANF administrators and your staff, you work so hard to prepare recipients for employment, to find jobs, keep jobs, and advance in jobs. But you don't know always the end of the story if you don't have the employment data. So we definitely make this a major focus in the initiative. So how do you set up data access, governance structures? How do you figure out data linkage, et cetera? So Dennis and Sharon will talk a lot more about the details of this important work. For the project broadly, we did a needs assessment, and working with HHS, we really wanted to not do a cursory needs assessment. We didn't want to set up technical assistance that is not needed or not relevant. So we spent a lot of time talking to you all about what are your needs as TANF agencies trying to make better use of your data. So the outreach and the response to this was really quite impressive. I believe we heard back from something like 47 or 48 states and territories. So almost everyone responded. Many states and territories had multiple respondents to this survey. So we just have great data about sort of the baseline here in terms of a lot of great work that's happening today, and also what are some of the barriers to doing more work in TANF in terms of data analysis. So we recently, Chapin Hall recently put out this brief that's available on the MDRC website. This is summarizing some of the key top-line findings from this needs assessment. We think you'll find this really interesting. I'll just highlight a couple of results that are very specific to what we're talking about today. So we asked you, TANF leadership, what are your top policy priorities? And what you told us loud and clear is it's about employment outcomes and it's about program effectiveness. And again, in order to really address those important priorities, we need the data. So how do we access, UI data is known to be sort of a gold standard for employment measurement. It's used in many evaluations, been used for many years. It's available, it's accessible, it covers most jobs. So it has a lot of great properties, but you're not able to access it. So that's really one of the findings from the needs assessment that drove this whole effort with our toolkit. The other thing we heard about was in terms of like why there's not more consistent use of data for analysis. We know that, again, there's a lot of great work in human services making use of data, but some of the barriers to more consistent use of data for program improvement are things that I don't think will surprise you. Issues like lack of time. We know with human services, there are so many fires to put out, so many priorities, and it's obviously in recent years become even more difficult. So staff time is a real barrier. The availability of technology and tools, so the legacy software, the old data warehouses are hard to extract data from, issues like that. Staff skills, although there's very skilled staff, this is a field that's moving so quickly that every year it seems there's another number of new methods to learn. So staff training felt like a need. And also, frankly, financial resources to free staff up to have some sustained focus on these sorts of analyses. So in our pilot effort, we're trying to get to this sort of pinnacle. We're starting from a high place, which is why this is, we think we know there's a lot of great work happening in human services, but to get even higher, we want to promote sort of sustainable approaches and a culture. So there's a lot of this is about building good teams, so we're all sort of rowing in the same direction to get a culture of data-informed decision-making. So I'm going to talk in a few minutes about our sort of data inclusion goals and that way that we were very intentional about trying to structure teams in this initiative. We have 8 pilots, and the funding that was received was often used to free staff up, in some cases to make hires for dedicated staff to do these projects. The pilot goes for 30 months. It started in March of 2020. So we're well over halfway through, about 9 months to go. The goal of the pilot is to complete at least one fully formed policy-relevant data-informed project, but in doing so, to lay down the track for reliable and scalable data use for the future. We have a lot of peer learning that we do. All of the pilots get a coach. The coach meets, at this point, monthly with the pilots. They were meeting every 2 weeks. And that's just to make sure that pilots are on track in terms of various project milestones, which they all have been. And then we offer a monthly TA series where all the pilots come together and we cover a myriad of topics like caseload measures, diversity, equity, and inclusion, data quality control. So we cover a lot of different fronts having to do with managing a data-informed organization. And all the pilots went through the Coleridge Initiative's Applied Data Analytics course, which I highly recommend if you have an opportunity to participate. So we kicked off this project just under the wire. It was very early March of 2020. So this was probably, for many of us, the last in-person meeting for a very long time after that we attended. So we kicked off then, and we've just been so impressed that despite all the pressures of the pandemic, that the projects, if anything, are exceeding timelines, and the outcomes have just been wonderful. So it's really been incredible to see how much engagement we've had despite a really difficult time to launch a project. Here are our pilots. So we have Utah, California, Michigan, Minnesota, New York, New Jersey, Virginia, and Colorado participating in our pilot initiative. And they are taking on sort of bread and butter projects like measuring employment and other outcomes among TANF leavers, identifying which customers are having difficulty finding stable jobs, but also one thing that we focus on a lot in these projects is understanding the labor market. So moving the focus away a little bit from the participant, but also the labor markets that they find themselves in. Where are some of the quality jobs in the better sectors, the sort of high road employers? So there's a lot of projects that look at segmenting the caseload, looking at dynamics, just a variety of different topics that are very policy relevant. So here's one project as an example. This is from the state of Virginia. So they're looking at, first of all, before jumping into any advanced analytics or anything, who are we serving? What are the types of families served? What are their benefit and service use patterns? And how does that break down by demographic characteristics? What does success look like? How many people are on successful trajectories? And what are some of the characteristics that are associated with that? In order to do that appropriately, the state had to spend a lot of time linking the data and dealing with identity resolution issues. So their analysis in Virginia is focused at the household level. So they're very careful about measuring the household well. And as you know, that can get very complicated. So they did a lot of great foundational work on making sure they had the right sample, defining a good cohort, so those fundamentals that everything else flows from. Ultimately, their project will involve machine learning, and they're developing a tool to help caseworkers identify combinations of services most associated with success. So it's sort of segmenting the caseload and trying to understand what practices are associated with successful outcomes. In all of these projects, and we think this is very generalizable beyond this project, so data inclusion has many facets. What we've focused on to date is creating integrated teams to bridge the gap between data staff and program staff. So early on in the project, we got advice that analytics projects often don't fulfill their potential because they don't engage program staff or leadership enough. So we've been very deliberate in trying to empower program staff to be involved in all the TA, to ask questions about data practices, also to have data staff communicate with program staff and subject matter experts to draw down insights about the populations, to help encode that information into analyses, to help understand results better. And a lot of states have reported that sort of that engagement that they have across functions right now is one of their favorite parts of this project. So it's something that we think can definitely generalize to lots of different contexts. So one of the ways that we try to operationalize that is by not being exclusive. So everyone's invited to every TA event. There's not data staff events versus leadership. Everyone's invited to everything. And we try to provide mechanisms taking advantage of technology like notebooks. So when the project gets a little bit technical and we get into some of the data analytics and some of the programming code, we take advantage of notebooks that have very good documentation, written just like a memo. They have good visualization. So there's common grounds. We could all meet around the data and talk and scrutinize the findings. So this increases the likelihood that the analyses will be field tested and anchored in some ground truth. So everyone's invited to everything, including the technical training. So as an example, we recently did a data quality control webinar, and that's a topic that could get very technical. But a lot of the beginning of it was just about the awareness of like what data quality control issues can do to an analysis. And then when we break out, we let participants choose their own journey. If they want to go to a more technical discussion of how to find data quality problems and get into some of the code and syntax and statistics of that, there's a room for them. If they want to stick with the sort of conceptual issues and the management issues around data quality, there's a room for them. So the differentiation has worked quite well, making sure that everyone gets something out of it. So again, we have our deliverable out on our website about the needs assessment if you're interested. So I definitely recommend that. And the last piece that I want to talk about briefly is we have a newish part of this project that's an outgrowth of what we're doing called the TANF and Employment Project, which we're really excited about. So this is making use of all the data that you're reporting as states in terms of state TANF characteristics to learn more about the employment outcomes of recipients and leavers, and to create a lot of documentation for future research. So this is essentially a large-scale project that's going to connect the federally reported TANF data with employment data from the National Directory of New Hires. The guiding principles of this project are, first of all, security is number one. So privacy and security, immediately de-identifying data, making sure the data are highly secure. And then we're trying to create an infrastructure to do all the heavy lifting so that if researchers from states or universities eventually want to come in and use the data in a secure space, they don't have to relearn how to read in the data and clean up the data. So we're doing a lot of the data cleaning and leaving a lot of documentation behind to try to expedite the time to insight. This is also being used for management improvement to help improve data quality issues across the system for topics like the TANF annual report. And we just think it's going to be a wonderful opportunity for evidence building. So stay tuned on this. So we should have more to talk about in that area in the future. But that's an overview of the TANF Data Collaborative. And I'll turn it over to Sharon and Dennis to talk about what we're doing with UI data.
Thank you, Rick. All right, so Dennis and I are going to spend a few minutes diving into some of the content from the actual toolkit, and you could be on the lookout. We're going to try to do some chat engagement. If you have questions, you can feel free to drop those in at any point, and we'll get back to them. So we're going to discuss the toolkit for linking TANF and employment data that we've been developing. We'll preview some of the content that may be helpful to you if you are trying to figure out data access, linkage, and analysis. And like I said, we'll have a couple of places where we'd like to pause for a little chat-based discussion. So be on the ready for that. So this toolkit is directed at TANF agencies, and it provides guidance for accessing, linking, and analyzing employment data. But we also wrote the toolkit with some other audiences in mind. So we think it's also beneficial for departments of labor, legislators, advocates, providers, and really anyone who's interested in practical solutions for accessing cross-sector data and figuring out how to link and analyze those data. To develop the toolkit, we put together an expert working group of TANF agency partners at the state and local level, policy experts, researchers on these topics, our federal partners at ACF, and our teams at AISP and MDRC. So we gathered this group over a series of virtual working sessions where we surfaced a lot of the core content for the toolkit. It was a highly iterative process, still ongoing, numerous rounds of convening stakeholders, writing, reviewing, revising, all of that. And we expect the toolkit to be available to you all and to the public in fall of 2022. So this slide here shows the high-level topics that we actually cover in the toolkit. We start with a discussion of some of the common barriers that agencies often face when trying to access, link, or analyze data. Then we offer solutions for overcoming these barriers, solutions that we have seen work for many other agencies. We outline the key methods for linking TANF and wage data, which we break down into 6 types of linkage. And Dennis is actually going to walk you through those in just a few slides here. So if you've been looking for ideas or trying to think through how would you join these 2 data sets, we've got some options for you to consider. We have a really great and detailed section that Rick has alluded to about data preparation. So once you have UI data, how do you actually get it ready to analyze? And there's lots of additional appendix materials, supplemental resources, links to code, guidance on governance, legal, technical, data security topics. So there's a lot packed in here for wherever you're at in this process. We think there's something in here for everyone. Okay, so here's where we get to the chat part, so you can get your typing fingers ready. While we were developing the toolkit, we found it really helpful to talk about some of the common barriers that agencies face when figuring out how to access, link, and analyze data. Every context is very unique, but when we get to talking, we realize that there are actually some things that tend to be challenging across jurisdictions, no matter where you are. And sharing with each other can kind of help lead to new ideas about how do we get through these common barriers. So we would love to sort of create that shared learning here in this environment and spend a few minutes in the chat thinking about the types of barriers that are most pressing for you and any ideas you have for solutions. So we're going to pause here and turn our attention to the chat. What I'd like you to do is take a few minutes on your own and think about this question. What barriers have you and your team encountered when you've been trying to access UI data or link it with your TANF data or analyze those data? And when you're ready, we'd love to hear something from everyone who's here about the barriers that you've experienced. So we'll give you a few minutes to think on your own, and then we'll kind of talk through what we're seeing in the chat. All right, had about a minute of alone thinking time. So would love to hear from you wherever you're at about barriers. Yeah, okay, so Kathleen's posting some things here. I think this is really common. The default is to not share UI data or to at least discourage reuse of these data for research purposes. What about others from the audience? We can certainly share more from our perspective too, but would love to hear from you all. All right, Aaron, thanks for chiming in. Income limits in Kentucky are extremely low. Many individuals that are employed at time of application will not qualify as they are over income. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, that's something specific to your context too, that I imagine some other states also share the same concern. But you tried to study income before and after receiving TANF. That's great. This is a good question from Sorna, it looks like. Can tribal TANF programs link TANF and UI data, or is it state only? Do any of my friends on this webinar have a good answer to that or experience linking tribal and UI data? That's a really good question.
Sorta, I'd love it if you would shoot me an email and we could talk a little bit more about what you're thinking. We had some evaluations that were carried out in tribes that encountered problems linking to UI data, but it was more because their tribe opted out of UI data collection. So there can be some interesting things going on there, but I'd love to talk more with you.
Thanks, Kathleen. Any others on unique barriers? Yeah, Sorna, we'll have Kathleen get you her contact information for that. Awesome, there we go, making connections. All right, any other barriers that people want to share before we keep moving? All right, well, let's keep moving and talk about some of the solutions highlighted in the toolkit. We are definitely going to save this chat and anything that you all share with us, so feel free to keep posting in there if there's anything that you think would be helpful for us to know about the barriers that you've experienced, any solutions that you've come across. But before we talk about data linkage methods, I wanted to actually show you some of the solutions that we highlight in the toolkit, many of which we've seen work across many different jurisdictions. So we cover 10 overarching solutions. They've worked in a variety of contexts. This list isn't exhaustive, though. It doesn't cover all the unique localized solutions that are out there, but we think a lot of them can fall into these buckets. Without reading through all of them, since you can see what's up there, I'll highlight a few. So first, cultivating cross-agency partnership and trust is key here, especially because, as Kathleen mentioned, data sharing is not the default. And to get data sharing going, those relationships can be really helpful. Data linkage presents privacy and security risks. It can be time consuming to set up. It can be legally and technically complex. And to get past of those types of barriers, you need strong relationships between all the data holding agencies and a sense of trust between them. So when the Department of Labor is considering if and how much and what type of data they might share with your agency, it matters if they can put a face to a name, if there's established trust so that they know that when they send you data, you'll follow all the protocol for protecting it and be a good data steward. So trust and relationships are essential here. And if you're stuck on data sharing, we definitely recommend starting to build those cross-agency relationships in whatever way you can. The next thing I'll highlight is that successful, sustainable data sharing and linking should have a clear data governance process, a legal framework, and a data security plan. And documenting those things and how they evolve along the way, the milestones you reach on signing agreements, on establishing processes is really helpful for keeping track of just the evolution of your project. This is especially important for when the inevitable turnover happens in leadership and staff who have that institutional knowledge, just so that you don't have to recreate the wheel every time someone leaves and moves on. And lastly, I'll say that leveraging the method you choose, so however you decide to link your TANF and employment data, can also be a solution. So for example, if you are able to use some type of linkage method like a linkage center or an integrated data system where you have ongoing routine access, that can make the data access smooth and consistent going forward, so that every time a director changes or a specific project ends, you don't lose that data access that you worked so hard to get. All right, and now I'm actually going to turn it over to Dennis to walk us through, we had referred to this earlier, we kind of break down the data linkage methods into 6 different kinds, and I'll have Dennis walk you through what those are. And you're on mute, Dennis. And on the top screen next to the video button, there's a microphone that you can click.
Okay, now does it work? Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah, my microphone icon was grayed out, so I couldn't do anything to turn it off or on. Sorry about that. Okay, so as Sharon mentioned, we wanted to go over some of the key linkage methods that are used when 2 agencies, the TANF agency and the UI agency, are looking to link their records and identify matches for analysis. Probably the most common way is a one-way data sharing arrangement where the TANF agency sends their data over to the Department of Labor, and people at the Department of Labor do the linkage and may even do the analysis and just send back aggregated data in tables. This is the easiest because the only agreement really that would be needed would be for the TANF agency to get the UI agency to agree not to release the identifiers and to return the data. So it doesn't require, a lot of work on the part of 2 law departments, but just the one legal agreement coming from the TANF agency to be signed by the Labor Department. A further extension of that would be 2-way data sharing, where the TANF agency might send just its identifiers over to the UI agency or Labor Department, and for the specific individuals they're looking to study, and then the Department of Labor shares back the wage records. They may even be able to strip off the identifiers, but typically they would probably send the identifiers back because the TANF agency is going to join up with it the TANF episode and usage data. So, of course, in this case, there would be a data sharing agreement between the two agencies, showing that they are agreeing to take adequate protections against the unintended release of the data or re-identification or reuse of the data. A third option would be to go with a third party. Now, this sometimes happens when a university or a research institute, such as MDRC, is doing an evaluation on behalf of the TANF agency or the labor agency, where they both agree to send their data to the outside third party who does the linkage and analysis. So that's yet another option. There would again have to be a data use agreement between the researcher and each of these agencies that would lay out the data security provisions being undertaken and the certification that there would be no release or reuse of the data or re-identification of people once they were matched and identifiers were removed. An increasingly common option is to share the data in a data linkage center. These one-off agreements that are executed between, let's say, a TANF and a wage agency data, Labor Department data, can take many months. I mean, 6, 8, 10 months to negotiate the details of an agreement. The Data Linkage Center offers an opportunity to have a systematic, centralized, and repeatable process for getting approvals for data linkage. In this case, an agency might be identified, could be a budget agency, could be a state health and human service agency, but some entity is identified as coordinating a data linkage center, and agencies send periodic extracts of their data with the researchable fields identified from the data model. They sent those extracts on a periodic basis, can be annually, can be semi-annually, can be even more frequent than that, monthly, quarterly. And some systems are set up to actually refresh those data on a daily basis. But the fact is that the data are reposited in the Data Linkage Center, and there is a standardized set of procedures for proposing projects, and the agencies can just simply sign off, and there's no need to repeat the legal agreements or all the security requirements. All of those things are embedded in the process at the Data Linkage Center. So not surprisingly, many states are moving in this direction, developing these data linkage centers, because it expedites the process significantly, reduces a lot of the friction that was involved in trying to execute one-off agreements. Another approach is group matches, where there are groups pre-identified and aggregated in the wage records or other summary statistics that are shared. And sometimes we've probably even heard the term fuzzy matches, where people use birth years and the distribution of birth dates to identify proportion of matches. It's another probably less desirable one because it's the least flexible with regard to what an analyst can do with the data. There are emerging approaches that we just wanted to make note of, that we identified as we looked around at what people were doing. So partly because of the Data Linkage Center approach becoming more common, one of the advantages is that data do not have to be sent around to different agencies or the research partners. Instead, the data are linked for the purposes of a particularly approved project, and then there is remote access provided to the researchers or analysts. They could submit queries, and those queries can then return, are applied to the data and return results. And this way, there's no risk of the data being lost or misplaced in transmission, because the data are reposited and stay in the Data Linkage Center, and the researchers just getting results based on their queries. So, and very often, especially if it's outside government, there might be biometric, fingerprint or eye scan or other sorts of ways that verify that the user is permitted to access the data. And the data access is always limited in terms of time how long the person will have access and what records they have access to. A new approach out there, secure multi-party computing, which is still under development and used in some places. It uses encryption of the data so that not only are they encrypted where they are, but in transit they're encrypted, and the analysis of the joint records is done on encrypted data. So there's no actual sharing in terms of repositing the data or any identifiers with any other of the data sharing partners. It's done through this new method. And this is something that's emerging, but it's not very common at this point. And let's see. So we have here in this table just a list of some of the pros and cons associated with the two-way data sharing, which is probably fairly common, and then as contrasted with sharing in a data linkage center, or what's sometimes called an integrated data system. You know, I'm not going to read through this table entirely, but you can basically see that the two-way data sharing is on the one hand more flexible, but it's also constrained by the single agreement and just the two agencies, a time-consuming process to get those in place. And you know, each agency that's receiving data has to independently be able to establish the required security for receiving records. A data linkage center, on the other hand, systematizes all these things. So it has that as advantages. It can be applied across many future projects, not just limited to the two agencies, but anyone who's contributing agency to the data linkage center or the integrated data system. All the agreements and such are set out. But it does have to, you do have to establish trust among the partners. There has to be a governance process that clearly articulates the legal basis and ethical basis and policies and procedures. So that is something that has to be done, but that generally is something that's done once with a lot of upfront work and then just revisited, you know, every couple of years to make sure that it reflects the best state of the art with regard to those things. So that's sort of the snapshot and discussion of the key linkage methods, and I'll pass it back over to Sharon.
Right, thanks, Dennis. I think this is a good point to just pause for questions or anything that you all in the audience would like to hear more about. We did have a little conversation going about just the fact that departments of labor and TANF agencies are often speaking different languages. So even talking about the process, talking about legal agreements can be confusing because people don't often use the same terms. So we were in the chat talking about just how relationship building and regular points of contact can actually help with that, because you start learning what each other uses to refer to different things. You understand the priorities of each side and how to align them a bit. But any other questions or topics you all would like to hear from? We have covered the core of our content.
And I would encourage folks to even talk about things they are working on right now or would like to start working on too. This is a place to discuss those things. Sharon, this resource that has been put together, it's not available yet, correct? But it will be available soon.
Correct. We are expecting release to the public next fall by that time frame.
Could people put in the chat what grantee they're associated with, or if you're at ACF or some other office, what you're at? Be nice to see where folks are coming from. Oh, that's great. Region 3, TANF program specialist, so good. And Aaron from Kentucky, wonderful. Oh, very good. Thank you, Brianna. Portland, Oregon, very good. There's a comment in the questions. It's almost like there needs to be a mediator between TANF and UI, Department of Labor. Need to flesh out what TANF needs and negotiate it with DOL, a translator.
Actually, that's one of the advantages of the data linkage center approach or integrated data system, because basically the people who typically will be leading the integrated data system are very knowledgeable of the laws, the ethics, the data security requirements, etc. And so they can essentially mediate between the agencies and tell them how they're going to be complying with the best standards of practice in those areas. So it helps to build trust by saying that their specific expertise is helping to negotiate these agreements and getting people to participate. So that's an advantage of that approach.
Great. I found when you don't have that organizational structure to drive that work, I find that sometimes a good translator will appear, and then through turnover, they leave you, and then so it's good to try to institutionalize that
Yes.
that common language when you get it.
There is another note in the chat about what you do with the data once you have it, and that's something that we have a lot of resources that'll be in the toolkit about how you organize UI data and create measures, and we're planning on including some free code, so of course code in SQL. So because UI data has a very similar format across states, there's small variations, but we're hoping that the code that we have will help states to more quickly get to measures that could be used for program improvement. And I'll also stress that even though the official toolkit will be available next fall, if there's if you have specific questions or if we could provide any resources for you in the meantime, we'd be happy to.
Let's see. Aaron from Kentucky says, we are working with an agency called Kentucky Stats, KY Stats, on the Kentucky longitudinal data system. And they would love to have resources for our project. And there's a link here. Thanks for sharing the link to this work.
We are actually pretty familiar with KY Stats at AISP. We work with them. They're a network site. They're sort of part of our group of integrated data systems that we're familiar with across the country, and they do some really excellent work for the state. So if you'd like to get in touch and want to tell us specifically what type of resources you're interested in or want to talk about, please do. I will drop my email in the chat here for you as well, Aaron.
Okay, well, it seems like we're wrapping up. Any last questions for the order or comments? Okay, well, I really encourage you to keep lookout for these resources, and also keep an eye on the tanfdata.org website. And then, of course, AISP has great things on their website too. Check those out. And keep doing the great work you're doing at the regional offices, at state, tribal, and territorial TANF programs. Like, thank you for all the work you do. Great. And in the chat is a link to a survey. If you could take a few moments and fill that out, we would really appreciate it. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the summit.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.